entertainment, but the show have been widely successful. But where is the line drawn between art, entertainment, science, and respect for the dead? Corpses on display today on All Things Considered, starting at 4 on 91.3 WLRN. Partly sunny today with a 20% chance of rain. Southeast winds at 5 to 10 miles an hour. Partly cloudy tonight with a 20% chance of rain. 20% chance of rain through the weekend. At 1 o'clock, it's 92 degrees.
91.3 WLRN presents Topical Currents. As we all know, the English language is often baffling and unpredictable, especially in spelling and the use of homonyms. That is, if you know what I quote mean. Today we visit with Alves-Milho, the author of Enigmas of the English Alphabet. This small book gives the history of language and the alphabet, and how English grew into the most used language in the world. It's also the language with the most words borrowed from other languages. Stay tuned for more on language and the alphabet. Later, literary contributor Ariel Gonzalez catches up with acclaimed Russian-born novelist Gary Steinhardt. His first novel was The Russian Debutante's Handbook. Now, he's followed it up with Absurdistan. Stay with us. Topical Currents is next, after the news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Calling it a war with Islamic fascists, President Bush said today that a foil plot to blow up multiple transatlantic flights was proof that the U.S. continues to face terrorist threats. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, today Mr. Bush spoke after British authorities announced they averted a plan to detonate explosives and carry-on luggage on flights from Britain to the U.S.
Again, I appreciate the close cooperation between our government and the government of the United Kingdom. The American people need to know we live in a dangerous world, but our government will do everything we can to protect our people from those dangers.
British police say they arrested 21 people in London overnight. Interior Minister John Reid says police are confident the suspects include main players in the plot, but Reid warns there's more work to be done.
This is an ongoing, complex operation, and we all believe we have taken the necessary precautionary measures to protect the public. The police and the security services, together with government officials, are working round the clock to prevent any further terrorist activity.
That especially includes tightening security on flights. Britain stepped up security to critical, meaning an attack is expected imminently. In the U.S., the alert level is at its highest, red, for flights from Britain to the U.S., while other flights are at orange. The heightened security is causing major delays at airports across the U.S. In Denver, the wait at security checkpoints is an hour and a half. While lines remain long, NPR's Jeff Brady says most flights are arriving and leaving on time.
Lines at ticket counters and security checkpoints look like they do during the busy holidays. Local media are advising travelers to arrive at Denver International Airport at least 3 hours early. The primary confusion appears to be what to do with items that are now banned in carry-on luggage. The Transportation Security Administration says liquids and creams must be placed in checked luggage. An airport employee was driving around with a garbage can for people to dump prohibited items. While nearly all flights in and out of the airport were arriving and departing on time, hundreds of travelers missed their flights this morning. Jeff Brady, NPR News, Denver.
In the nation's capital, the subway system is increasing security today, and officials in New York are reporting business as usual. Looking at figures from Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up about 10.5 points at 11,087. The NASDAQ Composite Index is up about 5 points at 2,065. The S&P 500 is up about a fraction of a point at 1,266. From Washington, this is NPR News. There is renewed terror spread by a prison-based gang in the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo. The latest upheaval is highlighting the issue of security in Brazil as the presidential election campaign heats up. NPR's Julie McCarthy has more.
Between Monday and Wednesday morning, more than 100 violent attacks against police and civilian targets had been carried out by the group known as the First Capital Command. From inside prison, the gang directs its operatives on the outside. In this third systematic assault in 3 months, they besieged buses, banks, car dealerships, and government buildings with crude bombs and gunfire. The recurring violence has presidential candidates on the defensive. President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, seeking re-election, says he's offered help, but the state has spurned him. His main challenger is the former governor of Sao Paulo, whose highly touted handling of criminals now looks ineffectual. Third place challenger Heloise Helena says while Sao Paulo is held hostage, the president and governor debate who's responsible. Julie McCarthy, NPR News.
Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut has the support of at least one of his congressional colleagues 2 days after losing his party's primary election. Senator Mark Pryor of Arkansas announced his support after Lieberman said he would run for re-election as an independent. Pryor said the Democratic Party needs moderate voices. The death toll from recent floods in eastern Ethiopia is up to 250 now. Police say rescuers found more bodies when they widened the search area for missing flood victims in the town of Derdawa. After heavy rains last weekend, the Dachatu River banks burst. I'm Lakshmi Singh, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from the Ford Foundation, committed to creating opportunities for people to live freer, better, and more prosperous lives. Online at fordfound.org.
And we're back for today's Topical Currents. Joseph Cooper with you. 6 minutes past 1 o'clock on today's Topical Currents. 1 out of every 7 humans in the world speaks English. Half of the world's books are written in English, and 80% of all computer text is in English. But it isn't an easy language to learn, as many know, because of the many exceptions to rules and spellings and such. Joining me now is Alvaro Alves-Milho, the author of Enigmas of the English Language. Welcome to you, Alvaro. Of the alphabet, excuse me.
Yes.
What prompted you to write this book?
Well, as a foreign language speaker learning English, I've had the difficulties that you mentioned. But basically, when I was in Pennsylvania, I was trying to go to the Reading Railroad. But I always...
And of course, anybody who's played Monopoly knows it's Reading.
Exactly. Well, not in South America. We all call it Reading Railroad. So I asked somebody, how do I go there? And they told me, well, it's not Reading Railroad, it's the Reading Railroad. And I asked this person, why? And he said, I don't know. So I thought, well, why would the same combination of letters be pronounced in 2 different ways? I don't understand that. And that prompted me to start doing some research and trying to find out by myself, because I had never been told about why these different. Of course, I've been through differences. For example, the same word read and read are written the same way.
Of course, present and past tense.
Right. But you know, at some point I thought, why? But I forgot about it, and I just went on learning English like everybody else.
And accept the irregularities and cope with them and do the best to get by.
That's right. But, you know, we, at least I didn't think of it as an irregularity. I thought there are rules that are so complex that I don't understand them. And that was my basic viewpoint. But when this happened, it made me think again. I said, you know, I always liked the alphabet. I mean, I always studied language. And when I was a kid, the alphabet was a big impression on me. And the rule of the alphabet, at least in Spanish and Latin languages, is you use it as building blocks to make your words.
Do you speak other languages than Spanish or English?
I learned German when I was in school. I don't speak it now, but I learned some of the rules associated in German. And I can understand Italian. I work for a Costa Cruise Lines, which is an Italian company. But no, I speak English and Spanish.
So, are there rules that govern the irregularities, or is it just serendipity, so to speak, of why we have so many different homonyms and also spelling variations?
Well, eventually, I remember that I asked Merriam-Webster. My question was, how is it decided how to write a word in English? And the answer was, well, we basically follow what the native speakers do. So basically the answer was, well, there was no rule. But I kept doing my research, and I found, for example, in Merriam-Webster, they say that because of William Caxton, which was a publisher that started printing books in London, and he created his own rules, if you want. Actually, he didn't have some of the symbols that the scribes were using in England, particularly the stroke that goes on top of long vowels, that distinguishes long vowels from short vowels. He didn't have that, so he decided he was just going to print these books without that. So Merriam-Webster blames William Caxton for most of the irregularities of English. So what I found is that it's due because nobody ever really finally decided this is the way we're going to do this. There was no such successful effort to create. I don't like saying rules, and a lot of people don't like that word. But it's if you study the alphabet, you're going to see that it's basically an art very close to a technique on how to represent words. Well, I think in English, the main problem or the main cause of this situation was the great vowel shift.
Vowel shift.
The great vowel shift, which happened sometime in between the 15th and 16th centuries. And what happened was the vowels, which in Latin are a, e, I, o, u, and represent a particular position of the mouth, were changed to a, e, I, o, u. Now, according to David Crystal, in the Encyclopedia of the English Language, there's really no good explanation why this happened. There is basically more or less a mystery. But what happened is you have, when you say A, you will have a gliding sound that represents several positions of the mouth, not one. When you say E, well, that one actually happens to be close to a one position of the mouth. Then you say I, that's two, A, I, O, U, and EU. It's not even U, the long, it's EU. So this is different completely than the way the alphabet was defined since the times of the Greeks. The Greeks had alpha, and the sound was A. The first sound that is expressed, alpha, eta, omicron. So, and the Roman or Latin alphabet is A, E, I, O, U. So the alphabet was used to spell words based on the sounds. That's called phonetics. And
now the alphabet actually goes back to the Egyptians, though. Is that correct?
Well, no. The alphabet goes back to the Hebrews, basically to okay. If we talk about vowels, the vowels were first represented by the Greeks. They weren't represented before that. There is some kind of writing that the Egyptians used that was close to it, but it wasn't an alphabetic per se. So it's basically the Hebrews and the Babylonians developed something close to alphabetic writing. They were the first to represent. They represented, for example, a letter called Aleph, which is the predecessor of Alpha, and which is current A in Latin.
So also give the history of how Latin, the Roman language then became the Romance language by geography, be it France or Spain, Portugal, that those were what they called the vulgar forms
Vulgate.
of Latin,
Right.
and they changed by geography.
Yes. Sound variation is normal. And it happens actually from one individual to another. Latin enforced a lot, and it didn't change much, but Latin was spoken all over the Roman Empire, which of course included Spain, France,
And Great Britain.
Great Britain. When Latin started to vanish and the local dialects started to develop, the sounds started to change, but they still used the same basic vowel sounds. You still in Spain, Italy, Romania, you're gonna find a, e, o, u as the vowels used. But in France, because of the Germanic influence, you find more types of vowels, and in particularly a sound which is called the schwa, which is something else that has caused confusion.
Now you have to explain that schwa business because it's very important.
The schwa is basically the
SCHWA.
SCHWA, that's right. The schwa is basically a vowel. The definition of a vowel is a sound that is goes through your throat without interrupting the air, and while at the same time using your vocal cords. And that's basically the definition of a...
So when I say ah, e, and oo, I'm not interrupting the airflow by the positioning of my mouth or tongue.
Correct. So the schwa, it's actually a sound that if you don't move your mouth and you just relax and you use your vocal cords, like you hear this sort of a dull and indefinite sound that it's the basic vowel sound, but it's not expressed in any alphabet.
Sounds like the beginning of ventriloquism.
Yes, that's right. If you don't move your mouth too much, if you don't open, you have a tendency towards pronouncing everything like that. So now, when you say ah, of course, you are opening your mouth in such a way that that sound changes and it's resonates in a different way. So it evolves into a vowel. So we could say that the schwa, it's a basic vowel sound that evolves into the other sounds by the position of the mouth. Now, that sound, if you move your mouth a little bit, may sound like an ah, like you know, or if you close your mouth a little bit, it might sound like an a, like So it's difficult to identify, where the Latin vowels are very easy to identify because a, e, I, o, u, you cannot confuse those sounds once they are pronounced in the position of the mouth.
My guest is Alves-Milho. He's the author of Enigmas of the English Alphabet. Let's take a short break on our program. We'll be back with more.
On the next Fresh Air, we discuss Hezbollah and the conflict in Lebanon with Augustus Richard Norton, a professor of anthropology and international relations at Boston University. He's been writing about Lebanon for 25 years. Much of his work is focused on Shiite political movements. I'm Dave Davies. Join us for the next Fresh Air.
Tune in to Fresh Air this evening starting at 8 on 91.3 WLRN. And this Sunday on our Sunday special,
it's happening, and it's happening to our neighbors. It's happening to us.
Americans have been going bankrupt in record numbers. So last year, Congress cracked down.
Congress can pass all the laws it wants, but it won't change the underlying economic reality.
Listen for Bankrupt, Maxed Out in America, a new American Radio Works and Marketplace documentary from American Public Media.
Sunday evening at 7 on 91.3 WLRN.
And we're back at 19 minutes past 1 o'clock. It's today's Topical Currents. Joseph Cooper with you. If you'd like to join in our conversation about enigmas of the English alphabet, you're certainly welcome. That number is 1-800-743-WLRN. 1-800-743-9576. And by email, that address is radio@wlrn.org. radio@wlrn.org. And we'll be glad to take your calls. My guest is Alves-Milho. And again, his book is Enigmas of the English Alphabet. I have an emailer here. This is Frank. He says, if English is a tough language to learn, guess how difficult it is to become literate in Mandarin. I love Spanish, but I really love English, and I'm glad I don't have to maintain a machista gender context as I speak and write English. That is a point, that English doesn't have the gender factor that most languages do, most European languages do.
Oh, but it used to. Old English used to have this. This is common to all the Indo-European languages. This is something that was lost, and I don't think it necessarily needs to have an emotional side of it. It probably just means that this is coming from old Indo-European language, and it's probably just a tradition. I don't think it has any meaning, but it was part of Old English.
And when did that decline?
It declined when the Normans conquered England and they established French as a language. They basically relegated English, and English started to change dramatically and simplify. Actually, Old English was much more complex than even Spanish. It had lots of inflections.
I mean, because the French had conquered them, they made English sort of a secondary language of maybe the poorer classes?
That's right. It was not used by the government. It was not used by the nobility, and only peasants were using it.
So why would that make the genders disappear?
They basically started to forget or to simplify the language. And obviously they come to the conclusion, which I would agree with, that it's not necessary to have an inflection on every single word that you pronounce based on a supposed gender. However, it is interesting to know that you do use some gender sometimes. Because, for example, you say, or in English, oh, look at that car, she is beautiful. Well, there's nothing she.
You always refer to a boat as she, or an aircraft.
Right, and I have heard people referring particular women to bugs as he's. So there seems to be something.
What was that again?
Flies, for example. A fly, he is bothering me. I've heard this. So I'm not sure there is a common usage rule for this, but I've heard happening.
Again, our number, if you'd like to join in, I have some lines open. 1-800-743-WLRN. 1-800-743-9576. I've got Nancy in Miami. Hey there.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. I had a couple of comments on some of the comments that had been made previously about the evolution of the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
It derives, all Western alphabets derive from Phoenician. That includes the Hebrew, the Arabic, Sanskrit in India, and Greek, all the Cyrillic alphabet systems, as well as the Latin alphabet that we all use. And secondarily, I don't know, I didn't hear the first 5 minutes of the show, but one of the problems that we have in English, of course, is that we're not a phonetic language, but we once were. When the printing press was developed, which is when the rules of spelling were really codified, people were speaking Middle English, the language that Chaucer wrote in,
mm-hmm.
and it was 100% phonetic. What happened was the English has both a Latin and a German base, and the German has taken over more and more since then. And so a lot of the things that we're pointing out, like the lack of gender, come from the German base of the language, not the Latin base.
How about the number of irregular verbs? Some of our most popular verbs are irregular.
As far as I know, there is not a language in the world that doesn't have irregular verbs, and they are always the most common.
The bring, brought, teach, taught,
Yeah,
freeze, froze.
They will vary, but go and come are irregular in all languages. The verb be is irregular in all languages.
They're common in
That I
every
know of.
language. The irregular verbs are common and they happen in every language.
But are there more in English?
I don't think so.
I don't either.
I don't think so. Now, regarding the Phoenician being, yes, you're right. They actually, that's the common knowledge. But I read this book that actually it was developed before by the Hebrews, so there's some controversy there. But I would agree that the Phoenicians were the first to really use the alphabetic writing. And yes, it comes now. Regarding English being a phonetic language,
A non-phonetic language.
at one time it was, as you said. Maybe part of the reason that when it was lost, the relationship between the sounds and the vowels, that didn't really help because it is still
correct
phonetic on consonants, fairly.
About 80% of the time, the consonants are phonetic.
Yeah, a lot of them are mute, sometimes, and you don't use them. But the vowels are the more interesting. Now, I was watching that movie. A friend of mine told me, "Oh, why don't you watch that movie, My Fair Lady?"
My Fair Lady.
My Fair Lady. I watched that as a kid. I didn't understand anything,
The rain in Spain lies mainly on the plain.
Right. But her pronunciation, that's right. But her pronunciation is the rain in Spain lies mainly on the plain.
Yeah.
Now, when this is Cockney accents, correct?
Right. Correct.
This is very alphabetical. That's how I would pronounce those words if I didn't know anything about English.
The Cockney alphabet is closer to Middle English.
Right.
The way they speak.
Right. So English was a
instance,
phonetic language. Then so we'll have to. What happened
and
here?
what happened was after there was a very, very brief period of history, about 50 years, in which the transition from Middle English to Modern English occurred. And that time, what happened was called the Great Vowel Shift, which was the shift between the association between the long vowel and the short vowel sounds.
Right, and that's what I think what I add in the book to that is that even though the Great Vowel Shift is a mystery, according to most...
Right, no one knows why.
No one knows why. But if you just look at what Cockney does and what British do, they basically, if you have the schwa, you're going to say, and if you consider that the schwa is a sound that's more or less like and then you hear the A, for example. It's more or less like A, Right. It's mine. So it's on that. Now, if you listen to this same sound in Cockney, it's I. So it's my,
Right.
So I think what happens is that the schwa was introduced in the long, which are used to be the stressed vowels. Now, this is another thing that I was looking at in Roman times. Stress was expressed as length, not as different. So, for example, a long A would sound like ah, two of them.
Right.
While a short A. Now, in English, it changed to A.
Right.
In my opinion, because the sound, what happened here is that the schwa has been introduced from the adjoining consonants, and now it sounds like I,
Right. It didn't come from the French because the sound in French.
That's right. A lot of that comes from French. Yeah. Also, the French have all these wild combinations of letters to pronounce, like E-A-U is
We're going to have to return to this topic some other time. Thank you very much for joining us, Nancy, but I'm just about out of time.
That's okay.
And
Thank you.
We'll have this discussion some other time. I want to thank Alves-Milho, the author of Enigmas of the English Alphabet. And where can people pick that book up if they'd like to? It's available online somewhere.
It's also available from Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, and BarnesandNoble.com.
We'll be back with more Topical Currents in a moment.